Acolytes. I didn't do one of Archer's videos for a long time, although I actually wanted to do it, but I want to do so much videos, but the time, well, I still have to work, so if this changes after I make a good coin on this here channel, but for now 2 a day must be enough. So, let's just see what Arch has to say about the left can't stop siding with demons. I can't even disagree.
Again?
And by the way, yes, I understand it, this face. Behind the mask, exactly the same.
You cannot be serious. 3 times in as many weeks. Wokeism try not to identify with actual demons from hell challenge. Difficulty rating literally unironically impossible, as
Seems
it
so,
turns
yes.
out. As here we have a pride flag with Korn, Slanesh, Zinch, and Nurgle combined to queer chaos forever.
Yes,
This coming hot.
and by the way, except for Slanesh, none of the others would accept this. No, maybe Zinch, because the manipulation from this kind of stuff is actually quite impressive. Huh. Well, guaranteed Papa Nurgle wouldn't agree. He wants to spread love, not hate.
On the heels of the Devil May Cry anime, declaring that demons are just brown people that want to live in America, and that it is wrong for the United States to bomb the shit out of hell.
Yeah.
This seemed ridiculous. Who could ever assume that bombing hell could be a bad thing? Unless we remember that the week before that again, Trench Crusade came out and said, oh no. There's no clear good and evil in our setting. I mean, yes, flail-cocked rape demons from the third circle of Infernum are indeed rising up on Earth to pillage, violate, and eat every single human soul on the planet, but
correctly.
Don't you know? The Christians are doing some pretty mean things in order.
The thing is, these days, and especially those people, have a sick, fanatic, I don't know how to say it, I would say fetish for criminals. So I'm honestly not surprised that they identify with demons that heavily.
To live. Oh, well, complete moral equivalence there, no doubt about it. You know, when I first started talking about Trench Crusade and how it seems as if the developers of that game identify more with the demons than the Christians, I felt like I was stretching a little bit, you know? I generally felt like that, okay, this is a little bit of a crazy hypothesis, but I can see the patterns. Well, it's not a stretch anymore, is it? It was turned into a slow, little bit of a hands out there to barely even a motion in less than a month. Okay, right. So, we are actually going to have to explain this. How you can create stuff like this, where the Gene Stealer cults are striking workers. How this can actually happen.
As I said, criminal worship repeatedly, and also they know they're doing very bad stuff, and every human being that just doesn't want to accept reality will look for any kind of way to just look like a good person, just so they can feel better, no matter the cost. Don't ever do that, acolytes.
How does anyone actually identify with evil? How is that possible? Surely anyone would look at something like this and go, I'm not identifying with the bad guys, that's insane. I'm not going to declare the child-eating Eldritch abomination from It a queer icon because it makes my movement look really, really bad.
And there is a difference between finding the idea of the bad guy cool and actually, well, for F's sake, acolytes, I am a lich myself, so you know, and actually worshipping them. There's a difference.
I am not going to embrace the name of feminids because it makes me look really, really bad. And
feminids.
That is all in a day's work of modern-day progressivism. Okay, so to actually explain this properly, this comes from Sig-Marxism. Sig-Marxism is a extreme left-wing Reddit website that has been sadly dormant for a rather long time. Tragic because it was a prime content farm. This was the post. No pride in the Imperium, death to all emperors, with 1,000 upvotes, which is pretty good for a basically dead subreddit. This subreddit has a few rules, like don't punch left. This is a space for all leftists, not a place to resolve differences between tendencies, because when you're arguing about which flavor of fascism you prefer, you're gonna get a lot of infighting amongst the tankies and the anarchists and the communists, etc. Except from liberals, of course, who are exempt from Rule 2. You can punch liberals all you want, because at the end of the day, they're only really useful idiots for the march of far more extreme left-wingism. So, how does this lead us to the identification with evil? Well, it's all in the title right there. No pride in the Imperium, death to all emperors. In 40k, the established world order is, of course, the Imperium. What is considered normal is to go, Khorne, who kills everyone, who cares not from whence the blood flows, who is nothing but a bloodthirsty, monstrous, demonic deity, is not a good thing. However, to progressivism, it is a good thing. Absolute excess pleasure to the point of self-destruction is not a good thing, but to left-wingism, it's a good thing. We change what is wrong, regardless of whether or not it's functional or not. Good thing. We are part of nature. Depression, death, and rot. Good thing.
Hey. You heard it.
How? Well, we're gonna have to do a little bit of a history lesson here. At the ending days of the 1800s, the bearded source of all evil, Karl Marx, forwarded a hypothesis, a theory stating that the working class would inevitably rise up against its oppressors. The oppressors, of course, were the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, the rich that controlled society, the nobles, the privileged. Eventually, as education became more and more common and access to capital and factories spread more equally so that people could actually create their own goods and seize the means of production, it would become inevitable that the working class would do so, as they would realize, hold on, I am being oppressed. I don't want to be oppressed anymore, so I am going to seize control of the means that are oppressing me. I am going to take over my own labor, and I am going to overthrow the tyrants. It was inevitable, Marx proclaimed. And then the decades rolled past, and the decade, and the decade, and the decade, and the decade, until something like 50 years later, a lot of socialists and Marxists were sitting around going, why hasn't anything happened? The bearded man promised me it was inevitable. Why has it only occurred in Russia? And then quickly, of course, the Leninists were crushed under the boots of the Stalinists. How could this be? The proletariat must know they're oppressed. We've been telling them so for very long. Indeed, during the early 1920s and 10s, etc., there were a rising interest in Marxist ideology. Marxist movements, workers' movements, etc., had often an enormous amount of members in their political parties,
Yes.
the hundreds of thousands. This eventually led directly to the rise of fascism, incidentally, because
Yep.
it actually delivered the revolution that the socialists were constantly promising. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The socialists then racked their tiny pea brains to figure out why the revolution wasn't happening. This is where we introduce our favorite little monster, Antonio Gramsci. I've talked about this before, but considering that this has turned into an actual straight-up bloody trend at this point, I feel it bears repeating. Antonio Gramsci put forward the idea that the revolution wasn't happening because the forces of bourgeoisie, capitalism, etc. were so thoroughly entrenched within society that nobody understood that it was bad. They accepted it as the normal thing. Of course we work in the factories. Of course the clergy pray for us, the nobility eat for us, etc., etc. This is just the way of the world, and because it is the way of the world, we cannot change it. Gramsci then claimed that the only way the revolution could be made inevitable was to change society, so that the working men could look at it and go, well, this isn't normal anymore. It isn't normal for me to be oppressed. That isn't the way of the world, and therefore I shall rise up against, well, what was perceived to be the natural order. Very well. But this is easier said than done.
Correctly.
How does one change what is basically the settled form of human society since the first Stone Age barbarian picked up a rock and started barking orders at the next guy in line? Good question. Gramsci put forward the idea then that everything needed to be upended. Everything needed to be inverted. All of the usual ideas and expectations of society had to be undermined, preferably via institutions, via entertainment.
The thing is, what I think before he continues, I think the biggest thing why this doesn't work is because most people are just scared of actually taking the road and being a leader, or being the human being that actually starts the change. And it's way easier to actually just follow and hope that the person that leads you will do good things. But this is just a uneducated theory of mine with, well, basically my lifetime, what I've seen with human beings.
Or education, until the point where literally everything we considered normal had been flipped on its head. This includes, of course, morality and normal value systems.
Yes.
This is how we arrive at the point of I and you, I'm pretty sure, looking at this and going, yeah, no, Korn doesn't just fight oppressors. That's not really what he does. And Slaanesh does a hell of a lot more than drinking the pleasures of life. This is obviously evil. This is obviously evil. This is obviously good, etc. So, to inverse morality, you need to boldly proclaim that no, these symbols of actual evil are good. They are revolutionary, you see. Korn doesn't merely just be a demonic entity that revels in the blood of actually literally everyone. No. He revels in the blood of tyrants. Yes, he revels in the blood of oppressors.
Bollocks.
He revels in the blood of emperors and the petty bourgeoisie. And as always, there is a pinch of truth in it. That's how it's sold. Yes, absolutely, Korn does fight oppression, alongside fighting absolutely everything else. Slaanesh too does take pleasure in life. In fact, there is literally a passage in Liber Chaotica where there is an interview with a known Slaaneshi cultist, where the interviewer is like, so why did you do it? How did you become a Slaaneshi cultist? I mean, have you seen the guys up north? This is obviously evil. And the guy, an educated aristocrat, is just like, no, you misunderstand. Slaanesh isn't like that at all. Slaanesh is merely a god that asks you to take pleasure in living, that asks you to take pleasure in the food that you eat, in the company you entertain, etc. That's all Slaanesh does. forgetting to mention that the noble in question carved up and ate his entire family for dinner afterwards. Because that is exactly the point with SmilingLich, it is excess, it is always pushing forward. Same with all of it. There are iotas of truth that justify the turn to a revolutionary end. And
Yes.
this, then, is where you arrive at things like this, where even if the gene stealer cults have nothing to do with communism, beyond being absolutely centralized and authoritarian, I suppose, it is indeed potentially striking workers. Absolutely. Gene stealer cults will infiltrate imperial society under the guise of attempting to liberate it. They will shut down factories, seize the means of production. They will attempt to overthrow what they present to be an authoritarian rule. However, there's the kicker. Whilst the Imperium is absolutely authoritarian, oh hell yes, that isn't the reason why the gene stealer cults are doing anything. They
Correctly.
aren't doing this to improve the lives of the people on the planet. They're not doing this to help their fellow workers, quote unquote, or citizens out. They are doing this so that they can eat them. Which is why
Yes.
this is a brilliant little metaphor for Marxism. You remember that whole thing, don't punch left, followed by accept liberalism? Well, the liberals are the ones who make this meme, who go, they're just striking workers. How are you killing them? You're not the good guys. You're screwing yourself. You are gaslighting yourself into thinking you're good when you're obviously evil. These will then swiftly be eaten, devoured, indeed, by these people who go,
Correctly.
oh, yeah, no, except for you. You we can purge. You are our useful idiots. This will then continue until eventually you end up with Stalinism, yet again, tankyism, where the biggest, baddest socialist will look at all of the others and go, your services are no longer needed, comrade. The revolution will remember you. Chick, chick. Bang. This then is also, yet again, coming back to the identification with evil. It is all to upset the natural order. It is also all to find the people who are willing to accept it, to weed out the wheat from the chaff. Because if somebody looks at this and goes, I don't know, comrade, this is a bit extreme, he's not going to be willing to go far enough to upend society.
Correctly. And the thing is, every normal human being sees that this is too far. I mean, if you're an edgy teenager, maybe you'll find this funny, but...
He's therefore going to need to be somebody to be removed, somebody to be placed in a different camp. Things like Pennywise, being a queer icon, is a constantly repeating cycles of purity testing to make sure that the entire movement is continuously radicalizing at a rapid clip. It needs to go faster. You begin with something simple like, yeah, but we need a little bit of representation, and then more. This continues then to see the upturning of the norms and the speeding up of the process. Because if this ever stops without actually having finished upending the entirety of society, you will not have overthrown that societal norm that we talked about.
Correctly.
That norm that binds people in the shackles of oppressive reality and prevents them from carrying out the revolution. This is why, again, it must get more and more and more and more extreme. However, as revolutions aren't really possible in today's age, not really. Especially not in the countries that might be the most inclined towards left-wing revolutions, shall we say, in Europe.
Fair enough.
Unless the military suddenly switches side, I suppose, which in some countries... Instead, then, you have a radicalization not towards more violent action, which might lead to the overthrow of the government. You instead have radicalizations in more and more extreme statements, as the quest to upend the social norms, whilst potentially brilliant in the 1920s and 30s, actually becomes a self-defeating cycle in the age of the internet. Things like this only push people away. Normal people
Normally,
are
yes.
going to look at this and go, oh, no, that's absurd.
I don't even see. I would add that it's not just the radicalization of a certain side or some is a certain thinking, but also this self-harming compassion towards people that are presumably oppressed. Everything else can get harmed, just not the chosen ones. And we have this one in Germany pretty heavily.
But since leftism is in that constant cycle of radicalization to upend the social norms, you are going to get people claiming that the demons from hell are not the bad guys. You are going to get people claiming that the demons from hell are the victims. You
Yes.
are going to get people claiming that the demons from hell are fighting oppression.
Yeah.
This is the reason also why progressivism and wokeism has burnt itself out so remarkably quickly in our modern day, going from near absolute control of the institutions, of politics, of the legal systems, of the political and cultural zeitgeist of just 10-20 years ago, to today's position, where they are in painful retreat all across the board, and must reach for ever more authoritarian means in order.
Yes, and it cannot go quick enough. And I hope that it's not too late for me or for us here.
Order to attempt to retain that control by either banning opposing parties like we see in Germany, or arresting opposition leaders and jailing them as we see in France. These are not the actions of a victorious movement. These are the flailings of a tyrannical force being brought to heel, as is yet again this. No movement that has any hope of attempting to claim the majority of the populace will ever look at the man carrying a desecrated fetus on his belt and proclaim him the champion, the hero to be emulated by the masses. Of course not. And yet that is the position we are in right now. That is why, when you see this, you must call it out for what it is. Don't simply dismiss it as absurdity or ridiculous. It is, mock it, absolutely, laugh at it, no doubt about it, but you must also realize this for the tactic that it is, and point out that no, this isn't by accident. They aren't doing this for a meme or for laughs. They actually do believe this. That is the key point. You've got to point out to people that when the leftists identify with actual demons, that isn't them being funny. That isn't them taking the piss or being ironic. They actually are identifying with the forces of natural evil, of inherent instinctual evil, and that this is the only logical conclusion to their movement. A lot of people are going to think you're mad for even saying that, because how could you ever, but I think we've received plentiful ammunition right now to substantiate a pretty gosh darn solid case for it.
Yep.
Well, hey, on the bright side, I will, as usual, say, congratulations, Sig-Marxism, and thank you. You remain the Chuds.
For F's sake, yeah, those effing times that we're in right now. I mean, it's not even the worst times, but still, it's getting better. Acolytes just have to see it positively. It's getting better every day, just a bit, step by step, but it's getting better. Slowly but surely. But as it is, good night.